Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode of Hudson County Review Live. I'm your host, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, John R. Heides, and today we're joined with Leadership Alliance Executive Director Julie Roginsky. Julie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Julie, for those that aren't familiar with the Leadership Alliance, just give us a brief summation about what this super PAC is and why you're supporting U.S. Senator Bob Menendez in his re-election campaign.
Exactly for that reason. It's a super PAC that was designed to help Bob Menendez get reelected to the Senate. We believe very strongly that Bob Menendez is absolutely the right choice, not just by virtue of his own record in Congress and the Senate, which has been phenomenal for decades, but also because of the opponent that he's running against, his support for Donald Trump, his opposition to New Jerseyans through his work as the head of Celgene, which we can get into a little later. And so a group of us decided that we were going to do whatever we could to make sure Bob Menendez gets another term in the Senate.
All right. So on that point, you're obviously aware there have been some publications ranging from the National Review, the Star Ledger, and others that have said, that Bob Menendez is doing a disservice to the Democratic Party by running again, and if they had picked a different candidate, this would have been a cakewalk. So, obviously I'm paraphrasing, but what do you think about that sentiment that's coming out of some of these mainstream media outlets?
Look, I disagree. First of all, I think Bob Menendez has had such a tremendous record in the Senate and seniority as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that anybody new who would be coming in now would be playing catch-up, and that would be to the detriment of people in New Jersey. Secondly, Bob Menendez has been as exonerated as you and I. Bob Menendez went through his troubles. He obviously was found not to be guilty. And Bob Menendez is moving on with his life and doing his work on behalf of the people in the Senate. The National Review clearly has an agenda. They're a right-wing publication, so it's in their interest to say that. The Star Ledger has its own opinion. I happen to disagree with the Star Ledger's opinion on this. I've worked in the Senate for a long time ago for other senators, and I will tell you I'm hard-pressed to think of one as impressive as Bob Menendez. It's great for the state to have him there.
All right, so now on this campaign itself, we got an interesting dynamic just in the sense of the money that's being spent. Obviously, the Leadership Alliance is involved. Bob Menendez is doing his own fundraising. The fundraising branch of the U.S. Senate, the Democrats there are involved, and of course, Bob Hugin is spending a lot of his own personal money and his fundraising from the Republican side. So, this is going to be a race where tens of millions of dollars go into it. So, is that something that you were anticipating, say, a year ago? Well,
you omitted one. There's a super PAC that former Governor Chris Christie and his allies have started to help Bob Hugin, which will tell you everything you need to know about where Bob Hugin's loyalties lie and how close he is to Chris Christie, and the voters should know that as well. Look, Bob Hugin is a wealthy man. He's a man that ran Celgene for a very long time. He's a man that got very rich and got yachts and ski houses and vacation houses based on the fact that he charged $700 for a cancer pill that cost 65 cents to produce. Think about that. Think about how much money Bob Hugin has made off the backs of cancer patients, and more importantly, think about why it is that Bob Hugin has all this money to spend. He has all this money to spend purely because he gouged cancer patients in their biggest time of need in order to get rich for himself. So when you think about why Bob Hugin's been up on TV for all these years, or months, it seems like years, why he's been able to spend so much money doing what he's doing, it is because he spent his career gouging people at their sickest, charging them $700 a pill for a pill that cost him 65 cents to produce, and going further, fighting very hard against making those pills generic, which would make them much more affordable for New Jerseyans and people all across the country.
So on that point, we've heard from the Hugin campaign that Senator Menendez doesn't have a leg to stand on when it comes to the Celgene stuff due to the fact that he's accepted large contributions from pharmaceutical companies, both in Congress and the Senate. I'm sure you would disagree, but tell me why.
Well, Bob Menendez is not the one denying cancer patients life-saving medicine and forcing them to choose between having to pay rent and having to be able to afford drugs. At a time, Bob Hugin was doing that, Bob Menendez was fighting very hard to preserve Obamacare, to pass Obamacare, to make these kinds of drugs more affordable. While Bob Menendez was doing that, Bob Hugin was fighting tooth and nail with Washington lobbyists to prevent the generic version of his drugs from being made more affordable, to the point where he didn't have a problem making them more affordable for people like Russians. In fact, he gave a huge discount to people in Russia and his drugs on the backs of New Jerseyans and the backs of Americans. I don't know where his priorities are, but they certainly are not with the people of New Jersey.
So we have seen, getting away from the Celgene stuff for a moment, we have seen in a couple instances here, some elected officials in the southern part of the state, the central part of the state, out from the Democratic side, have actually endorsed Bob Hugin for Senate. For as far as I know, obviously Hudson County's my specialty, nobody terribly prominent, but I mean, does it surprise you that some Democrats have crossed over and endorsed Bob Hugin?
I actually can't think of one prominent or relevant Democrat that has done that, and I know all of them. And I know how hard they all work to make sure that Bob Menendez is going to get reelected. I mean, you think about central New Jersey, Middlesex County. I know that the chairman there is committed to do everything it takes to get Senator Menendez reelected. Same goes for South Jersey. I know that the powers that be down there are incredibly committed, as is Hudson County. I mean, look, I've worked in and around Hudson County for almost 25 years, and Bob Menendez has been the glue that has held Hudson County together for a very long time, at least the entire time that I've been there. So, again, when you think about who's endorsing Bob Menendez versus who's endorsing Bob Hugin, you know who's endorsing Bob Menendez? Chris Christie. He's running ads in support. No, sorry, Bob Hugin. Sorry, Bob Hugin. Chris Christie's running ads in support of Bob Hugin. You know who else is supporting Bob Hugin? Donald Trump, because Bob Hugin gave more than $400,000 to Donald Trump's campaigns. He stands with Donald Trump. He stands with Chris Christie, and Bob Menendez stands with the people of New Jersey, the people of Hudson County, and every single Democrat who's ever been involved of any consequence in New Jersey knows that.
So yeah, Bob Hugin, when the campaign was still in the early stages, I guess it was probably around May or June, he was basically presenting himself as an independent with the Republican marker, I guess we'll call it. And since then, we've seen that he sent out mailers that have said, I'm going to stand with Donald Trump on X, Y, or Z. Yeah. And we've also seen, even just this morning, you may have noticed that he tweeted a rebuke at Donald Trump regarding some of his controversial comments about hurricane relief in Puerto Rico. So it's been an interesting dynamic to watch. I mean, what's your read on that?
Well, my read on that is everybody knew who Donald Trump was before he was president, right? We all knew Donald Trump when those tapes came out of him being misogynistic towards women and so on and so forth. And despite all of that, Bob Hugin still continued to raise money for him to the tune of almost $500,000. Then Donald Trump becomes elected, and there's nothing that Bob Hugin has said to distance himself from Donald Trump. There's no indication that he would not be another vote for Donald Trump's agenda to repeal Obamacare, to make the salt taxes exclusion permanent, which means that people in New Jersey would be paying more and more and more in taxes to punish New Jersey, which is exactly what Donald Trump did. There's absolutely no evidence that he would do anything to preserve Obamacare, because we know from his record as a pharmaceutical executive that he never did anything to help people get health care. All he did was gouge people and make profits off of their health care woes. So if you look at it from that perspective, he can say that he distances himself from Donald Trump because of Hurricane Maria, because what Donald Trump said about Hurricane Maria is just factually so preposterous that every Republican with half a brain came out and said that Trump is wrong. But it doesn't mean he's not going to vote for Donald Trump, and doesn't mean that he's not going to be another vote for Mitch McConnell, to put somebody like a Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, who is going to take a woman's right to choose away if he gets on the court. So there are myriad examples of times when Bob Hugin stood with Donald Trump financially, stood with Donald Trump ideologically, and there's no reason to believe that once he gets to Washington that would change.
So despite everything that we spoke about up to this point, there's been probably 4, 5, 6 different polls up to this date and time, and one internal poll from the Hugin campaign, and we both know internal campaigns need to be taken with a grain of salt, but that had it within 2 points. But we've seen other polls, like I believe the Quinnipiac poll was within like 6 or 7. So everyone's calling it pretty close, despite everything again that we just been discussing. So I mean, what do you attribute that to?
Well, I attribute that to the fact that Bob Hugin has spent months basically having the airwaves all to himself. There was nobody responding to him, and that's now changed. I obviously don't know what the Menendez campaign is intending to do, because there's a firewall between our PAC and what they're doing. We've been up on the air for the last few weeks discussing Bob Hugin's record, both on TV and on radio. We will continue to do whatever it takes to get that message across. I suspect at some point Senator Menendez is going to really up his TV buy. And that's when people will know more about Bob Hugin. The fact that Bob Hugin still can't get a lead after throwing the kitchen sink at Senator Menendez all summer long and having the airwaves all to himself, tells me that he's in a lot more trouble than people think he is.
So, if you had to call it today, what do you think the final percentage points will be on November 6th?
You know, I called Hillary Clinton and swore up and down that she was going to be the president of the United States, so I am out of the prediction business in terms of percentage points or anything else. But I will say that with confidence that at least our PAC will do whatever it takes to make sure that Bob Menendez is going to be back in the Senate next January.
And perhaps you could call it a non sequitur, but just in the event that does happen, or even if it doesn't happen, the Leadership Alliance, what do you have in mind beyond 2018, if anything?
Haven't thought about it. Our priority right now is just making sure that Bob Menendez gets reelected. That is the entire focus of what we're trying to do.
Okay. So we've talked obviously a lot about politics surrounding this race. As far as policy goes, why do you think that the average New Jersey resident could say that Bob Menendez has went to bat for them, has been a very good federal legislator from, your average Joe Schmo? Why do you think he's been very good from a policy perspective?
Well, first of all, you're talking about somebody who was instrumental in making sure that more people in New Jersey had access to health care by helping to shepherd through Obamacare. He was instrumental in fighting back against this horrible Republican tax plan that is going to inflict so much damage on New Jersey. And if Bob Hugin gets to the Senate, he will make that permanent. And we cannot afford to do that. I mean, property taxes in New Jersey are no longer going to be deductible up to beyond a certain point, and state and local taxes, essentially, which is incredibly problematic for people in New Jersey. And Bob Menendez has been at the forefront of fighting against that. Bob Menendez has been tremendous on foreign policy, and if you look at the fact that Russia has been a real threat to our national security and continues to be, now that Senator McCain is gone, there is probably nobody stronger on that issue than Senator Menendez as the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And so on Israel, there's no greater ally of Israel in the Senate that I can think of than Bob Menendez. So time and time again, he has stood for what people in New Jersey want, not for what Donald Trump wants, certainly not for what Chris Christie wants, but from what his own constituents want, not just Hudson County, but the other 20 counties as well.
All right. And so can you give us a little bit of a flavor of what you have in store for Bob Hugin in the home stretch here?
Well, stay tuned. But certainly Bob Hugin should not expect to continue to have the airwaves all to himself the way he has all summer. And we are continuing to make it clear in every way possible, through earned media, through paid media, that Bob Hugin is somebody who will never put New Jerseyans first. He had the opportunity to do that to the most vulnerable among us, to people who literally were dying of cancer, and he gouged them, and he charged them $700 a pill for something that cost him 65 cents to produce, and he did everything he could, working with Washington lobbyists, to prevent cheaper generic drugs from coming into the market to reduce his own money, to reduce his own compensation. So every time anybody watching this or hearing this sees a Bob Hugin commercial, remember where that money came from. It came from Bob Hugin gouging cancer patients, or it came from a super PAC aligned with Chris Christie that's helping Bob Hugin. If you want more Chris Christie in your life, if you want more of Donald Trump in your life, then you might want Bob Hugin. If you don't want either of those two people having more influence in your life, then you should consider voting for Senator Menendez.
And outside of Donald Trump and the healthcare aspect of this race, is there any other reasons, anything you've seen on the campaign trail and beyond, why you think Bob Hugin is not qualified to serve in the U.S. Senate?
Well, first of all, Bob Hugin's never served the public at all. In fact, all Bob Hugin has done throughout the bulk of his career is gouge cancer patients to get himself rich. So we see what happens when people who are wholly unqualified get elected. Just look at Donald Trump. So there is something to be said for sending people to Washington who have experience, who are New Jerseyans, who've been New Jerseyans through and through, who came up through the system in New Jersey. I mean, Bob Menendez started as a school board member. So when you look at the difference in experience, the difference in knowing how to navigate the Senate, the difference in knowing how to bring money back to New Jersey, the seniority that Senator Menendez has accumulated, there's no question. I mean, there's just no question that he's the more qualified candidate.
So when this whole campaign started and it was official that Bob Hugin was going to be the Republican challenger, some people were calling this the tale of two Bobs from Union City for obvious reasons. But do you feel like that has kind of disappeared, like that whole dynamic doesn't really exist? Do you feel like there is a decent amount of voters out there that still see it that way?
Well, you go to Union City, and who reflects what people in Union City want, and who reflects the dynamics of Union City more? Senator Menendez or Bob Hugin. You're absolutely right, two people from the same town. But you look at Union City today, you go walk the streets of Union City, and you say to them, tell us what you think Bob Menendez has done for you. And they'll be able to tell you because they tangentially know it. I mean, tangibly know it. They just know it. It's palpable. You ask them what Bob Hugin has done for them, they'll say, who's Bob Hugin? I don't think Bob Hugin has given Union City a moment's thought since he went off to college, where he, by the way, tried to prevent women from joining his eating club. And did that not just as a college student, but well into his 30s, which is just unconscionable. If you're a woman listening to this, understand that he also wanted to essentially keep his private eating club at Princeton segregated from women. And so if you're basing it just on that, I don't know that Bob Hugin represents anything that Union City stands for anymore. Go ask Brian Stack. I mean, I'm sure he'll be happy to tell you exactly how much he's dealt with Bob Hugin in the years that he's been mayor. I assume the answer is probably not much at all, because I assume that the day that Bob Hugin went off to Princeton to try to discriminate against women joining his eating club was probably the last time he really gave Union City any thought.
All right, Julian, anything else, any more color on this race you could provide before we call it a day here?
None other than to say people in New Jersey truly, truly have a choice in November between somebody who stood for them time and time and time again, protected Obamacare, tried to defeat every horrible Trump policy that he could. If the Democrats regain the Senate, he will be the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That is an absolute boon for our state. And then the other choice is a man who is aligned with Chris Christie and Donald Trump, who, again, every time you see a commercial of his, just remember that commercial is paid for on the backs of people who got gouged by paying $700 a pill for a pill that cost Bob Hugin 65 cents to make.
All right. Thank you, Julie.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in again. Have a fantastic weekend.